All right, topic 9, general strategy for factoring. All right, let's look at the first one. So we'll say factor. Okay, number 1, we have 6x to the fourth, y to the fourth, minus 24 x cubed, y to the fifth. So remember, the first thing you have to do, always, and you remember that from the first 2 weeks, the first thing you have to do is factor out the GCF if it's other than 1. So I want you to notice here, 6 and 24, the GCF of 6 and 24 is 6. And then we have variables. You have x's in both of those. So remember, when you have x's in both of those, you take the one with the smallest exponent. So the GCF of x to the fourth and x cubed is x cubed. And we have y's in both of those. So I'm going to have to have some y's here. Remember, you take the one with the smallest exponent. The GCF of y to the fourth and y to the fifth is y to the fourth. So there's your GCF. So remember, when you factor out the GCF, you got to say the GCF, 6x cubed, y to the fourth, times whatever we put in here, that times this has to give this back. So I want you to notice, you see how the 6, we already factored out the 6 and we already factored out the y to the fourth? So I factored out an x cubed. So I'm hoping you see this. X cubed times x gives us x to the fourth. So this times this is this. So 6x cubed, y to the fourth, times x is 6x to the fourth, y to the fourth. Minus 6 times 4 is 24. I'm factoring out the x cubed, right? And this was an x cubed, so I don't put any x's in here because I already took them out. This is how many I'm taking out. This is what I had. They're the same. So it's kind of like saying x cubed times 1 is x cubed. But I want you to notice the y's. I'm taking out 4 factors, but I had 5 altogether. So I got to have a y here because y to the fourth times y is y to the fifth. And so there's your answer. You cannot go any further with this because if I cover this up right here, this is prime. I can't do anything else. And so there's your answer. So remember, the first thing you got to look at is the GCF. All right, and then whatever when you take out the GCF, whatever you see here, you got to ask yourself, check each factor to see if you can factor it further. So if so, then factor again. So when I look at this factor, I couldn't do anything else to it, so I'm done. That's the answer. All right, let's go to number 2. Number 2, let's suppose we had this in number 2. We had 6a to the fourth minus 33a cubed, that's a cube, minus 63a squared. All right, so first thing you got to do, remember, is look for the GCF. So the GCF of 6, 33, and 63 is 3. I have a's in all terms. So that means I'm going to have an a in my GCF. And the question is, how many factors am I going to need? I have a to the fourth, a to the third, a squared. So remember, you always use the one with the smallest exponent. So that's your GCF. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out that GCF. So I'm going to say 3a squared times, you see how this is a trinomial? You have 3 terms, so you better have 3 terms here. You had 2 terms, you better have 2 terms in here, in that parentheses. So 3 times 2 is 6. A squared times a squared is a to the fourth. Minus 3 times 11 is 33. A squared times a is a cubed. Minus 3 times 21, 3 times 21 is 63. And I factored out an a squared, and that's how many I had, so I don't put any a's here. So far, this, when I factor out the GCF, gives me this. But remember, always remember, don't say that's the answer, because you see this factor right here, this trinomial? Look at number 5. Check to see if you can factor it further. If so, then factor again. So I'm going to go off to the side. I'm going to write this over. 2a squared minus 11a minus 21. Let's see if I can factor this as 2 binomials. So for the first, 2a times a is 2a squared. For 21, the possibilities are 7 and 3, 21 and 1. So let's use 7 and 3. So I'm going to put the 7 here, the 3 there. And remember, the last sign's negative, so that means these signs are going to have to be different. So remember the trial and error. So you try something. If it doesn't work, you try something else. But at this point, the more problems you've done, and you probably did a lot with all the problems in my math lab and all the problems in the worksheets, to where you can kind of guess as to where the negative sign goes and where the positive sign goes. So you want a negative 11a for your middle term. So that means that this 14, 2a times 7, 14, and this is 3. The 14 has to be negative, and the 3 has to be positive. Before you go any further, always check. The outer is negative 14a. The inner is 3a. When I add them up, I get a negative 11a, which is what I wanted. So that goes here now. So the answer is 3a squared times this times the product of these two binomials. 2a plus 3 times a minus 7. Remember, always put the binomial first. Okay, number 3. So let's do number 3. Number 3, let's suppose we had 6x squared plus 13x plus 6. So I want you to notice that when we look at this, remember the first thing you do is ask yourself GCF. So the GCF here, if you look at those three terms, is 1. Okay, now here's what it says. How many terms are there? If there are 2 terms, you go and you check and see if it's any of these. If there are 3 terms, which this is, if there are 3 terms, then let's just use trial and error. We had one of the lessons which we're not going to do in this Zoom meeting, but one of your lessons is topic 7, which talks about perfect square. But you can still use the trial and error with this as well. And then the 4 terms. And when you have 4 terms, I think that was the first week where you did the grouping. All right, so 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms. How many terms do you see here? 3. So let's use trial and error. So we're going to do the 2 binomials. So the GCF is 1. So for 6x, let's try 3x and 2x. This one's an easy one because the last sign's positive. So the last sign's positive. Remember, the signs in here are the same, and they're both that middle sign, so they're both positive. And for 6, let's try 3 and 2. Now remember our discussion in a previous lessons, 3 and 2. You're not going to put the 3 here, because if you put the 3 here, that means you can factor out a 3, which means that the GCF is not 1 anymore. And the GCF is 1. So we're going to put the 3 here and the 2 there. All right, now let's check it. Let's see what we get. So the outer, 3x times 3 is 9x. The inner is 4x, and when you add them up, you get 13x, which is what you wanted. So there's your answer. All right, let's do number 4. So number 4, let's suppose number 4, I had this for number 4. So let's suppose we had, let's see, let's do this one, number 4. We have 81x squared minus 16. Okay, 81x squared minus 16. So remember, first thing you do is ask yourself, what's the GCF? Well, the GCF of these 2 terms is 1. Then you ask yourself, how many terms are there? Are there 2? Are there 3? Or are there 4? If there are 4, you're going to try grouping. If there are 2, you're going to ask yourself, is it the difference of 2 squares, the difference of 2 cubes, the sum of 2 cubes, or the sum of 2 squares? Look at this. This is the difference of, see that x squared? Let's see if this is the difference of 2 squares. So we're going to do what we did earlier today. So you can ask yourself, well, is this the difference of 2 squares? So 81x squared is 9x times 9x, and 16 is 4 times 4. So this is the difference of 2 squares. So that's easy now. That's just 9x minus 4 times 9x plus 4. And there's your answer. Okay, number 5. Number 5, let's suppose we had this for number 5. Let's suppose we had y cubed plus 216. Y cubed plus 216. All right, so same thing. You're going to ask yourself, what's the GCF? If you look at this, the GCF of these 2 terms is 1. Then you ask yourself, how many terms are there? How many terms are there? Well, there are 2 terms. So notice, so there's a sum and a cube. So you want to ask yourself, well, is it the sum of 2 cubes? And there's a formula. So is it a sum of 2 cubes? So you're going to try and fill this out just like this. And so you're going to say y times y times y is y cubed. And for 216, so if you do the cube root of 216, like we did earlier, I want to show you. So the cube root, so you're going to press 3 for your index first. So 3, and then second, this button here. So cube root 216, press equal. You get 6. So this is 6 right here. And so then this is your F, this is your L. So remember the sum of 2 cubes. So remember the formula. The sum of 2 cubes is this binomial times this trinomial. So it's F plus L times F squared minus, the sign changes, minus FL plus L squared. And so you get your binomial, which is y plus 6, times, and then F squared says I take y and I multiply by itself. So F squared here will be y times y, which is y squared. So that goes here. And then minus F times L. So F is y, L is 6, so that becomes 6y. So that goes here, 6y. Plus, and then L squared. L is 6, so L squared means 6 times 6, which is 36. And that's it. There's your answer there. So binomial times trinomial. All right, let's do one more. Let's see. Let's try this one. 6xy plus 30x plus 7y plus 35. All right, so I want you to remember the process. The first thing you always do is ask yourself, what's the GCF? How many terms do you have? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. The GCF, I'm hoping you see this, the GCF is 1. Okay, so the GCF is 1, so there's nothing to factor out, but you have 4 terms, right? So if you have 4 terms, remember in week 1, that's where you did that grouping. That's where you did that grouping. So then, and for us, it's always going to work out to where you group the first 2 and then group the last 2. So in the first 2, do you see in the first 2, I'm going to cover this up. Do you see in the first 2, I can factor out a 6 and an x. So I'm going to factor out a 6x, and I get 6x times y is 6xy plus, and then 6x times 5, 6x times 5 is 30x. Okay, now let's do the second group. Remember, always bring down the sign. Plus, we're going to cover this up. Here, those 2 terms, I can factor out a 7. And when I factor out the 7, I get 7 times y is 7y. 7 times 5 is 35. And remember our conversation in week 1. If you're doing this correctly, those 2 things in parentheses, those 2 factors you see there needs to be the same. Now, they're the same. So now what you're going to do is you're going to factor out the 7 plus, the y plus 7, the y plus 5. And then when you factor out the y plus 5, you're left with 6x plus 7. And there's your answer. Okay? So, and we're at 5:15 right now. So remember, when doing topic 9, make sure you use this with those problems. So you always look for a GCF first, factor it out, and then ask yourself, how many terms do I have? Do I have 2 terms? Is it one of these? Do I have 3 terms? I'm going to just do trial and error. If I have 4 terms, I'm going to group, and always check to make sure that the factors, you can't go any further with it. You see like 3x plus 2? I can't do anything else to that. See this 2x plus 3? I can't do anything else to that, so there's the answer. That's what this last statement right here means, number 5. Check each factor, see if you can factor it further. Okay? And remember, in week 1 and week 2, look at number 6. If none of the above applies, then the polynomial cannot be factored. It is irreducible. And remember, we always use the word prime. If you can't go any further at all with the original problem, we say it's prime. Okay? All right, so don't forget about, for topic 9, it's important you look at this handout in Canvas. Okay, now